The vast and ancient land we know today as China was not, for many centuries, a unified empire, but a mosaic of kingdoms in constant conflict. From the 8th century BCE, during the period known as Spring and Autumn and the Warring States, these rival kingdoms, like Qin, Zhao, Yan, and Wei, were in an incessant struggle for supremacy. The threat came not only from within. The northern borders were constantly besieged by fierce nomadic tribes, such as the Xiongnu, precursors to the Huns. Essentially mounted warriors, the Xiongnu were masters of swift and devastating attacks, pillaging settlements and disappearing into the steppes before an organized response could be mounted. It was in this scenario of internal war and external threat that the idea of larger-scale defensive barriers began to take shape. The northernmost kingdoms, such as Qin, Zhao, and Yan, built their own fortifications, small walls of rammed earth and rudimentary stone. These were isolated barriers, about a few meters high and of limited length, designed to protect their specific territories from local incursions. These structures were not continuous. They were more like strategic defensive lines at vulnerable points, built with the technology available at the time: rammed earth, stones, and wood. The labor was local, composed mainly of peasants and soldiers, mobilized for these constructions. The necessity of these fortifications was evident. The vast northern plains offered little natural protection against the mobility of nomadic cavalry. A physical barrier, even if mortars could delay the enemy, buy time for the organization of defenses, and protect agricultural lands and population centers. Each kingdom built for itself, without a unified vision. But the idea of a collective Great Wall already hung in the air, a distant aspiration for China that was still fragmented. The concept of an interconnected wall was audacious, a monumental response to a persistent threat. These early walls, though humble in comparison to what the Great Wall would become, represent the seed of one of humanity's greatest engineering feats. They reflected the defensive mentality and the obsession with security that would become deeply rooted in Chinese culture. The Warring States era was an incubator of military and defensive innovations, and the walls were the most visible manifestation of this quest for survival and supremacy. The stage was set for a leader who, with the strength of a unified empire, would transform these scattered defenses into a legend of stone. The fragmented landscape of China, with its warring states and scattered walls, would change dramatically with the emergence of a ruthless leader, Qin Shi Huang. After decades of incessant battles, the state of Qin, under his visionary and brutal command, conquered all its rivals, unifying China in 221 BCE. He proclaimed himself the first emperor of China, and his objective was to create a lasting empire, free from the threats that haunted it. The greatest of these threats, in his view, continued to be the north. The incursions of the nomadic Xiongnu were an open wound, a constant reminder of the vulnerability of his borders. Qin Shi Huang, with his strategic mind and iron determination, conceived a colossal idea: to connect the ancient and sparse fortifications of the kingdoms he had conquered, transforming them into a single, monumental line of defense. He didn't just want a barrier, he wanted a declaration of power, a symbol of unification and imperial protection. The construction of this first Great Wall began soon after unification. It was an undertaking of unprecedented scale. Millions of people were mobilized for the task, mostly soldiers, forced peasants, and criminals. Under a brutal and inhumane labor regime, it is estimated that hundreds of thousands died during construction due to extreme conditions, diseases, famine, and exhaustion. They were literally buried beneath the wall, their lives sacrificed to the emperor's ambition. The construction methods were varied and depended on the local topography. In the plains, the predominant technique was rammed earth, where layers of soil, gravel, and clay were vigorously compacted in wooden forms, creating an incredibly dense and resistant structure. In mountainous or rocky regions, stone was the primary material, extracted and cut to form robust walls. Wood was used for scaffolding and some internal structures. The initial sections of the Qin Wall were not the brick and stone structures we see today. They were more rudimentary, but impressive in their extent. Qin Shi Huang's main objective was military defense. The wall served to curb Xiongnu cavalry attacks, breaking their speed and allowing Chinese garrisons to mobilize. Besides being a physical barrier, it functioned as a platform for patrols and watch, which could signal the enemy's approach using smoke during the day and fire at night. This allowed for rapid communication between posts, alerting the army to imminent attacks. But the wall also had other purposes. It was a form of border control, regulating trade and preventing the escape of peasants and criminals. More than that, it was a psychological symbol for both the Chinese and their enemies. For the Chinese, it represented the security and greatness of their empire. For the nomads, it was an intimidating barrier, the physical manifestation of Chinese power that they would hardly be able to overcome. The Great Wall of Qin Shi Huang, though fundamental in its conception, was just the beginning. After the fall of the Qin Dynasty in 206 BCE, other Chinese dynasties would continue to expand, reform, and maintain sections of the wall, recognizing its strategic importance. The Han Dynasty, for example, would extend the wall even further west, protecting the trade routes of the Silk Road. However, it would be centuries until the wall reached the grandeur and form that made it a worldwide legend, a continuous process of construction and reconstruction over more than 2 millennia. After the fall of the First Unified Empire and the succession of various dynasties that maintained and expanded sections of the wall using rammed earth and stone techniques, the Ming Dynasty, which ruled China from 1368 to 1644 CE, inaugurated the Golden Age of the Great Wall, the most famous and impressive version we know. The Ming emperors, after expelling the Mongols of the Yuan dynasty, harbored a deep mistrust of the nomadic tribes from the north and invested massively in fortifying their borders. The Ming objective was not just passive defense, but robust border control. They built and rebuilt the wall on an unprecedented scale, using much more durable and sophisticated materials. Most of the iconic sections of the wall that today attract millions of visitors, such as Batling, Mutianyu, and Jinjinling, were erected during this period. The Ming innovation was the widespread adoption of fired bricks and precisely cut stone blocks. These materials, produced in large kilns along the wall's route, were incredibly resistant to weather and wear. The construction of a single watchtower, for example, could require hundreds of thousands of bricks, each weighing several kilograms. The Ming Wall was not a uniform wall. It varied in height from 5 to 17 meters, and its width, from 3 to 6 meters, allowed for the movement of troops, cavalry, and carts on top. The labor force continued to be vast and often forced. Millions of soldiers, peasants, and prisoners were mobilized, working in brutal conditions, exposed to harsh winters and scorching summers. It is estimated that the construction of the Ming Wall took over 100 years of continuous work, with peak activities involving hundreds of thousands of men simultaneously. The human cost continued to be immense, with many dying and being buried near the structure, giving rise to the legend that every stone of the wall cost a life. The Ming Wall, with its strategically positioned about 25,000 across the entire Ming Dynasty extension, barracks, warehouses, and fortified gates, was a complex military defense system. The towers served as observation posts, troop shelters, armories, and signaling stations. Smoke signals during the day and fires at night could transmit information about approaching invaders over hundreds of kilometers in a few hours, allowing garrisons to prepare. The total length of the Great Wall, including all its branches and sections built by different dynasties throughout Chinese history, is an impressive and often debated number, but the most recent research by the Chinese state, concluded in 2012, indicated a total length of 21,196.18 kilometers, far beyond the previous estimate of 8,850 kilometers that referred mainly to the Ming sections. The military effectiveness of the wall was undeniable for its time. It hindered the mobility of nomadic cavalry, forcing invaders to concentrate their forces at specific points where the Chinese could confront them. However, it was not impacted. Legends and myths surround its construction, such as the story of Meng Jiangnu, a woman whose bitter crying caused a part of the wall to collapse, revealing the bones of her deceased husband who had been buried there. This legend highlights the human suffering behind its monumentality. Despite its grandeur, the wall, ultimately, would not prevent the collapse of the Ming Dynasty. In 1644, it was overcome not by a direct large-scale invasion, but by the betrayal of a Ming general who opened the gates of Shanhaiguan to the Manchus, who would go on to found the Qing dynasty. Nevertheless, the wall remained a silent witness to centuries of history, ready to be rediscovered and valued for its cultural and architectural significance. Despite its monumental scale and strategic robustness, the Great Wall of China, ultimately, was unable to contain the fate of the Ming Dynasty. In 1644, its fall came not from an overwhelming military assault along its entire length, but from a complex combination of internal factors and a decisive betrayal. The Ming Dynasty was profoundly weakened by massive peasant rebellions, endemic corruption at court, and a series of natural disasters that undermined imperial authority. It was in this chaotic scenario that General Wu Sangui, tasked with defending the strategic Shanhaiguan Pass, the point where the wall meets the sea and one of the most important passes, made a fateful choice. Instead of defending the empire against the Manchus from the north, he opened the gates, allowing Manchu forces to pass through with little resistance. This decision paved the way for the fall of Beijing, the end of the Ming Dynasty, and the establishment of the Qing Dynasty, which would usher in a new era for China. Under Qing rule, the Great Wall lost much of its primary military function. The Manchus were themselves people from the north, and once they governed all of China, the threat from the steppes, which the wall was built to protect against, drastically diminished. Furthermore, the Qing policy of appeasement and integration with the nomadic tribes of the north, instead of confrontation and isolation, rendered the wall obsolete as an active line of defense. As a result, many sections were abandoned to their own devices. Stone and bricks, valuable materials, were plundered by local peasants for the construction of homes, barns, and roads, and vast sections of the wall fell into ruin, swallowed by vegetation time and oblivion for centuries. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, with China's weakening and the growing influence of Western powers, the Great Wall was frequently viewed by many, both foreigners and some Chinese, as a melancholy symbol of isolation and backwardness. Western travelers, missionaries, and soldiers reported the existence of long and impressive ruins, but its true extent, complex history, and profound cultural significance were little understood by the outside world and even by many Chinese of the era. The image of a sleeping dragon, an introspective and aging China, mingled with the reality of a structure in slow but constant deterioration. However, from the mid-20th century onwards, and especially with the establishment of the People's Republic of China and a growing sense of national pride, the perception of the Great Wall began to change radically. The wall was rediscovered and revalued not just as an architectural wonder, but as a fundamental symbol of Chinese identity and the unwavering resilience of its people. It came to be seen not as a barrier that isolated, but as a monumental testament to the capacity for overcoming challenges, the ingenuity, and the persistence of a millennia-old civilization. Large-scale conservation and restoration projects were initiated, with a particular focus on sections near Beijing, which became accessible for tourism. These sections, such as Badling Mutianyu and Jintiangling, were carefully restored, allowing millions of people from all parts of the world to experience the grandeur and impressiveness of the wall. The Great Wall of China was officially designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987, solidifying its status as one of the world's most extraordinary architectural wonders and a cultural treasure of humanity. Today, the Great Wall is more than an obsolete military structure. It is a living cultural and historical monument. It attracts tourists from all corners of the globe, inspires artists, writers, and filmmakers, and serves as a vivid reminder of the complexity and depth of Chinese history. Its impressive length, the thousands of years of construction, and the vast labor force that built it symbolize not just defense against an enemy, but the incessant determination of a nation to protect its culture, its land, and its people against the vicissitudes of time and history. The great stone serpent that snakes through China's mountains and valleys is the materialization of a millennial history of ambition, sacrifice, resilience, and the pursuit of security, a legacy that continues to inspire and fascinate the world, marking the horizon with proof of human persistence. The Great Wall of China is a masterpiece of engineering and a millennial symbol of a powerful civilization. What aspect of its history, from its first walls to its current status, fascinated you the most? Have you ever dreamed of visiting the Great Wall, or what other historical marvel intrigues you? Share your opinion in the comments. And if there is another legend or a fascinating historical event you'd like us to explore in our next video, leave your suggestion below. Your curiosity is our guide.